Hey everyone, it's Kirsten and my unofficial co-host here, Elsa. And excited to welcome you to this week's episode of Weekly Hope. I'm going to take down the star of the show now. Oh, are you all right? She's having a little bit of anxiety, which we are going to talk about today. Anxiety, eating disorders, co-occurring disorders, and how to get the people that we love the most in our lives the help that they desperately need. The subject of this week's episode of Weekly Hope is interventions, what they are, why they're important, and of course, when to bring this into a part of the recovery journey. So lots to cover here today. If you're joining us for the first time on this broadcast, welcome and thank you so very much for joining us and for being here. The important thing is throughout the broadcast, let us know who you are, your name, where you're signing in from, what your story is. And of course, if you have any questions, comments, or thoughts, of course, you can feel free to ask Jerry, who is our expert and who I'm going to introduce and welcome so that we can dive right into our discussion. So with me today is a very special guest. His name is Jerry Law. There he is on the other side of the screen there. Jerry is an interventionist. He has decades of experience in this work, but he is also the executive director of Gentle Path and the Willow House at the Meadows out in Arizona. So Jerry, welcome to the show.
Hi, Kirsten. How are you? It's so great to see you.
Oh, good. I'm doing really well, and I'm so glad you are here all the way on the other side of the world. Are you in Arizona right now?
I am. Sunny Arizona.
Oh, amazing. Gorgeous. Well, you are lucky. Although I think everyone's kind of experiencing heat wave right now. I know that I'm over here in Germany and we in Europe were experiencing this crazy heat wave. So I feel like a little bit of Arizona has been coming to us over here.
Sounds like it. Yeah, it's been a brutal summer for us all.
Yeah, oh my gosh. Well, we're inside in the cool, and that's pretty good. So, I had the honor, and I'll just let everyone know, I had the honor of meeting Jerry, I think, oh gosh, I don't know if it's 5 years ago now, and got to know a little bit about what he does. And he was the very first interventionist who I'd ever met, and the first one I'd ever met who worked with eating disorders. And I think it's a good launching point of our conversation today, because when I first met Jerry and I started to learn a little bit more about interventions, the only experience, the only touch point I had with interventions was the very popular television show from several years ago called Intervention. And of course, it's Hollywood, it's super dramatic. And in some ways, it's good that TV shows like this bring things into the public consciousness a little bit more. But at the same time, there are a lot of misconceptions and stereotypes that can be reinforced in this process. So that's why I wanted to invite Jerry on to talk about this a little bit, and just the power of the work that he has done and the team at the Meadows do as well, to really change people's lives. And I know I've gotten lots of questions about these as well. So that's why we're excited to have the expert here to talk about it. So Jerry, to begin with, what are some big misconceptions, some of the biggest misconceptions that, well, actually, no, before we do that, tell us a little bit about day in the life of Jerry at the Meadows. What is your role? What is your position? And what does a day in the life look like for you?
Well, Kirsten, a day in the life is always changing. I serve as the executive director of both Gentle Path and Willow House here at the Meadows. Gentle Path is our men's only treatment program with a focus on sex addiction and co-occurring disorders. And Willow House is women's only program with a focus on relationship disorders, intimacy challenges, and co-occurring disorders. So we have a lot of interesting folks that come to us, spend 45 days with us in residential treatment. And I am truly blessed to be surrounded by some of the most incredible, talented therapists anywhere in the world who are truly the experts in this field. So, they do all the work, and I just turn them loose.
Yeah, amazing. But, speaking of experts, you have done intervention work for a long time, and I'm sure that you've seen a lot of change and growth in the industry, especially since it's become more of a part of common parlance. But what are some of the misconceptions, the biggest myths that people have about interventions, and what are they really?
Thanks. That's a good question. As you know, Kirsten, in addition to my role here at the Meadows, I also serve as the vice chair of the Association of Intervention Specialists. This is an association of interventionists internationally, and we get together and support one another in this process. To answer your question, I think the biggest misconception is the idea that an intervention is some kind of brutal attacking ambush, that we just get together and one day we decide willy-nilly to ambush someone and rough them up verbally and make all kinds of threats if they don't go to treatment. And of course, that couldn't be further from the truth. In reality, an intervention is one of the most loving acts that you can ever be part of. And in my case, I'm a strong advocate of a model that's based on love, care, and concern. It is rather about bringing together the right group of people, and through a very planned and prepared process, getting those people ready to sit down with a loved one who is struggling, whether that struggle is with an eating disorder, a drug or alcohol dependency, or some other compulsive behavior that really is controlling their life. And it's about presenting the truth. And the truth is we love you. The truth is we care about you. And the truth is we're concerned. And the truth is we're here today to offer you some help. And if you'll accept the help, here's what that looks like. And on the other hand, if you choose not to accept the help, then you need to understand the choices we're making. It's all about choices and consequences. It's never about beating people up or trying to strong arm people into doing something they don't want to do.
Yeah. Is there a difference in your work? Have you seen, is there a difference between an intervention for, say, substance abuse or some other kind of compulsive behavior or addiction and an eating disorder, or are they pretty much the same when it comes to tactics? And I hate using that word tactics, though. It sounds so wrong, but in strategy and methods, and we'll talk a little bit more about the methods later.
Well, the process is virtually identical. What is important is that the interventionist has a real understanding of whatever disorder the family and the individual are dealing with. When I do an intervention and it includes a family or an individual who's struggling with an eating disorder, I need to be very careful and cognizant of using the right language. Because if I go in there talking about drug and alcohol addiction, everyone looks at me like I've got three heads. When in fact, the individual is struggling with anorexia or bulimia or whatever the case may be. So it's critical that I use the right language in preparing the family for that moment. However, the process itself really doesn't change a whole lot.
Yeah. How long generally does it usually take for the family to prepare for an intervention?
That's a great question. I'm going to spend upwards of 10 to 15 hours with that family face to face, preparing them for the time when we actually sit down with their loved one. Now, there will have been a lot of work in advance of that, a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls, lining up the intervention team, determining what treatment program this individual will go to, and making sure that all of those pieces are in place. But then when we're actually ready to go, a typical scenario would look like this. I'm going to meet with the family or the team for 6 or 8 hours the day prior to meeting with their loved one. And I'm going to do a lot of psychoeducation. I want people to understand what it is that we're dealing with and why. Because, I might have 8 people on that team, 2 of which really would like me to just handcuff their loved one and drag them off. 2 of which would rather be anywhere than here. And the other 4 on the spectrum somewhere between. I've got to create a unified team. And the only way I'm going to do that is to educate them on the disease that their loved one is dealing with. Then I'm going to coach them on how to create a script that they're going to follow, a letter that they're going to read in the intervention. And then ultimately we're going to do a rehearsal, a comprehensive rehearsal in which we practice everything. We practice seating arrangements. We practice reading the letters. I want to hear these letters in advance so that if I need to make some modifications or some suggestions, I can do that. There are keywords we want to avoid. There are keywords we want to include. We are going to practice what do we do when the loved one arrives. We're going to practice what happens when the loved one says yes, or what happens when the loved one says no. So this is a day-long process. This might take anywhere from 6 to 8 hours. Then again, typically the next day, we're going to gather again. We're going to cover off any remaining logistic issues, and then we're ready. And we invite the individual into our presence. And the intervention itself may last an hour, it may last 5 or 6 hours. We really don't know in advance. But what is critical is, number one, having the right people involved, and number two, adequate preparation. It's a little bit hard to define adequate preparation, but it does include all of those things that I just shared.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one thing that you mentioned, you did a really amazing conference presentation for Eating Disorder Hope during our last conference. And then, we transcribed those into a blog series, which is on the Eating Disorder Hope website, if people want to read the full piece. But in there, you say something really important, and I would love for you to talk about it. And that's that it's not as though you're waiting for a family member or a friend to hit rock bottom before they have an intervention. And I've heard that all the time. And, everyone has to hit rock bottom and all this. Can you talk about the commonness of that language and actually why it's pretty dangerous thinking?
I think that's very important, Kirsten. As you know, and I'm very open to share the fact that I am personally in recovery. So I know what it's like to hit rock bottom. And I understand the value of that concept, this idea of the person hitting rock bottom. And I'm fine with that until you introduce what I call a dirty 4-letter word spelled W-A-I-T. We have to wait until they hit bottom. If the individual is already at a point where they're a danger to themselves, they're a danger to their family, they're a danger to other people driving impaired, they're using family resources inappropriately. When we're dealing with someone who's already at that point, my question is, what are we waiting for? Yeah. And so with an intervention, rather than waiting for the individual to hit bottom, we bring the bottom up to hit them. And in either case, they hit bottom. But what we're trying to do is eliminate that awful wait period where who knows what could happen, including our loved one's death.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And in many different ways that can happen. I think it's so important to recognize and acknowledge that these things can be fatal. And so many, I think especially parents, I hear from so many parents that don't want to acknowledge the seriousness of it. Not that they don't want to acknowledge or don't want to get their loved one help or their son or daughter help, especially if they're still living in the home, but acknowledge the seriousness of it. And do you often have to work with families to get them to understand how serious it is?
Yeah, I do. And that's really, really critical, because there's a lot of thinking of, well, my loved one it's a phase. My loved one will grow out of it. Well, that's the way they've always been, and there's nothing we can do. And that's where the psychoeducation comes into play. It's where educating people on what we call the biopsychosocial spiritual aspects of addictive compulsive disorders. And so helping people understand this is life and death. This isn't just about your loved one behaving poorly. They certainly may be doing that. It's about a brain disorder that has hijacked their life, hijacked their mental capacities, and it's time to step in and break that cycle. Whether the individual accepts the help that's being offered or not really isn't the issue. Of course, we hope they do, but the issue is breaking that cycle. One of the saddest stories of my career, Kirsten, was I got a phone call from a mom who was worried about her daughter who was dealing with anorexia. And we had a great conversation about the intervention process, but she just couldn't pull the trigger. And about 2 months later, she called me very tearfully to say that her daughter had passed away and how much she had wished that they had done something sooner. And it just breaks my heart.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry. It's wow. Yeah, and I just look back and I thank God that my parents got me help when they did. Um, so you talk in your blog talk about invitational approaches versus this
Right.
approach where it's a surprise. Is there one that you've seen that has a better likelihood of success? Success meaning that person does end up going to treatment than another?
You know, it really depends on who you ask the question of. There are several models of intervention currently practiced in the United States. One goes by the acronym ARISE, ARISE. It is an invitational model. Another one is family systems. These are both invitational models. In these models, the addicted individual is invited from the very beginning to be part of the process. And the family gets together and has several meetings and continually invites the person in. And if the person joins, then they can discuss treatment options. If they don't join in the process, then eventually there's going to be kind of the surprise model at the end of it anyway. Both of those models are very successful. I have chosen to embrace a model that I refer to as the trans-theoretical intervention protocol. I think there are aspects of all of these models that are really, really powerful and important. And I have chosen to take what I believe to be the best aspects of each of these models and combine them, with one exception. And in my case, I don't practice an invitational model. I want the family completely prepared before we sit down with their loved one. And so in my particular case, I choose to do all of that upfront work, the training, the planning, the preparation with the family before we sit down with their loved one. But again, I don't bring the loved one in for an ambush. We
Yeah.
welcome the loved one in, we let them know what this is about, we ask them to participate.
Yeah, I'm gonna post your article here in the comments so that people can read it, so they can click on the link. Rutherford says, even though I knew my disorder was really bad, I didn't know it was bad until after I got into treatment, and even then, I still didn't really get it, and which just shows, a lot of people. And actually, I would love to get your thoughts on this. If I was someone watching, this is the question I'd write into you, Jerry, before I go into my other list of 20 questions I have for you. But that's that there's kind of like two theories. Someone has to want to get better, and they have to, different from the rock bottom scenario, they have to want to get better and they have to choose treatment for themselves versus being kidnapped. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's another great question. The statistics that I've seen, Kirsten, are that whether a person came in voluntarily or came in kicking and screaming, the success rate going out is identical. And
Wow.
that's a testament to the power of treatment. Really good treatment
Wow.
programs can provide that kind of help. The hallmark symptom of any addictive behavior or disorder is denial. And I believe that denial manifests itself in multiple ways. There's the obvious, well, I don't have a problem. Then there's, I'm not sure what you'd call this, but this was me. Well, I might have a problem, but I can manage it. I can handle it. Or there's the victim. Poor me, woe is me, I'm hopeless, I'm helpless. And in some people's cases, all three forms of denial are in manifestation. That's what treatment is about. It is about breaking through that denial with education, with confrontation, carefully done, with group therapy, with individual therapy, to be able to help the individual understand this is not about them being bad. This is about them being ill. Now, it may have resulted in some bad behavior, but at its core, this is neurological. It's that biopsychosocial spiritual model. And it's incredible in treatment where we get to see the light come on.
Yeah.
Where, 3 days in, 5 days in, suddenly the person gets it and they engage in treatment. And they may have come in from an intervention, or they may have walked through the door saying, please help me, but they're still in denial. So we've got to break through that.
Yeah. You talked about a little bit about the stages of change that people go through. And this is kind of ties into that. Is there a stage that someone has to be at in order to respond to an intervention, or when you talk to the family beforehand to get a sense, because of course, your first job as a clinician is to assess whether or not the person, it's that time. Is there a stage that they need to be at, or what are some signs to you as a treatment provider that person is at the stage where an intervention will likely be successful?
Well, there's two answers to that. The individual we are intervening on is nearly always in pre-contemplation. They're in denial, or they would have already said, okay, I need help. The family, on the other hand, can be in a variety of stages. Kind of like I said a little while ago, where you have one person or a couple of people who are at this end of the spectrum and others at that. And the whole purpose of all that training time is to get the family to that action stage. For those of you who know the stages of change: pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. My goal is to get the family united into that action stage so that they can present the offer to their loved one. Now, the loved one is virtually always in the pre-contemplation stage. That doesn't matter. I'm not waiting. If they were already in action, they'd be in treatment. So the individual we're intervening on is nearly always in that pre-contemplation or that denial phase.
Yeah. So it's so interesting. We talked a little bit about the letter and the rehearsal. Can you talk? Oh, Lauren McAfee says hello, or gives a thumbs up. Hey, she's a good girlfriend of mine. So glad that you're joining us. And Samantha also says hello. Hi, Samantha. Thank you so much for being here. Let's talk a little bit about that letter. What's in it? Yeah. You mentioned that there are some things that you want to make sure that are emphasized and some things that are definitely not. Can you give us a little window into those?
I'll be happy to. In my case, I train the family members on a 3-part letter. The first part is affirming their loved one, letting their loved one know, I love you. And I always have them cite specific examples from their life experience with their loved one where they either gave or received love. Stories like, hey, remember that time, when we went on vacation and we had this great time and we really connected. I don't want them to just say, I love you. I want them to use examples from time and space to be able to really set the stage with their loved one that they are here to affirm them. The second section of that letter is the however section, in which I want them to present their concerns to their loved one, never as judgment, never as criticism or condemnation. And I train them to do this in a very specific way. Again, referring to specific events. Remember that time, and we were together, and we were all together at Thanksgiving, and I noticed that you were just kind of pushing your food around your plate. And then I noticed that you actually put some of that food in your pocket. And then I noticed that as soon as the meal was over, you got up and went to the bathroom. And we were concerned that maybe you were in there purging. And about that, I feel great fear. So it's never you're bad. It's citing specific examples and expressing my feelings. I'm frightened. I'm angry. I'm confused. I'm frustrated. I own, those feelings. Then section 3 of the letter is the consequences. If the individual chooses not to accept treatment, they need to understand the choices that the family members are making. Again, never punitive. It may feel that way to their loved one, but that's not what it's about. It is saying, since you've chosen not to go to treatment, you need to understand the healthy boundaries that I'm putting in place in our relationship. From this day forward, I will not enable this disease either passively or assertively. I will not do anything that supports it. I will continue to send a message of love, care, and concern to you, but I'm not going to pretend like this isn't what it is. I'm not going to walk on eggshells. I'm not going to make excuses for you. Our relationship is going to have to change in a way that you understand I will support wellness and recovery, and I will not support anything else. Now, that's going to look a little bit different. In, you know, a parent, the way a parent presents, that's going to be different than a sibling or a friend. So we spend a lot of time developing this script or this letter so that people can present the truth. What I tell them is, don't you make threats. Don't make threats, they're worthless.
Mm-hmm.
You simply are going to establish boundaries that have consequences. So those letters are very powerful, but they have to be written correctly.
Yeah, so good. Thank you for walking us through that. And I would imagine that the toughest part of that is, of course, we won't support anything else in putting up a firm boundary. And that kind of takes us through to the post-intervention conversation. What does it look like then for the family during treatment, but then after treatment? And I'm not sure, do you work with the families then after someone comes home? Because I would imagine then there's still a lot of stuff to deal with. And you were this person, now you're that person, making sure that they keep those boundaries that they promised in their letter. How does that go?
Yeah, that's another great question. When I'm hired to do an intervention, my client is the family, not the individual who goes to treatment. It was the family who hired me. So while their loved one is in treatment, I will continue to work with the family in helping them understand their own role. I'm going to encourage them to get treatment or therapy. I'm going to encourage them to participate in some kind of a support group, whether that's a 12-step program or Celebrate Recovery or a grief share, whatever the case may be. I'm going to do a lot of coaching with the family. The individual who's in treatment is working with those professionals, and I continue to work with the family. Typically, I will continue to work with them until their loved one comes out of treatment, at which point I want to hand them off to a qualified family therapist who can help them pull all of this back together. What people often fail to understand is if the environment at home doesn't change while the individual is in treatment, and that individual comes right back to the same environment, odds for successful long-term recovery are diminished. So everybody's got a part in the recovery process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am such a firm believer in therapy, even if you're not someone who is struggling seriously with an addiction. I mean, we all go through seasons in life, but especially if you're supporting someone who is struggling through this, that it's nothing to be ashamed of. And it actually makes you very strong, and gives you so many tools as well. I mean, it gives you tools to help your loved one, but also you as well.
Absolutely.
Bravo on that. You mentioned a percentage, a statistic that shows how well interventions work, meaning how successful they are. You want to let us know what that statistic is?
Sure. In our practice, we have tracked this for 40 years, and 80% of the individuals where we do an intervention go to treatment that day.
Wow.
So it's a very, very high percent, because done right, it's a very powerful process. Now, about 20% don't go that day. Now, at least half of those, if not more, will go to treatment, typically within a week or two, as long as the family stays united in these new boundaries they've put in place. And that's where my job really kicks into high gear. If the individual has not gone to treatment, I've got to continue to support this family system for the next week or two or whatever it takes until this individual makes a decision either to go or not. Sadly, there's a small percentage that it's going to take something else. The good news is the vast majority of people do reach out for help once they realize their family loves them enough to set healthy boundaries and discontinue any enabling that they've been doing that's made it possible for the person to remain ill.
Oh, it's so good. And I think that provides so much hope too for people that might be afraid of doing this, that their loved one's going to think they're attacking them or be mad at them, or that it's never going to work, or they'll just walk out of the room. That 80%, I mean, that is phenomenal. Go to treatment that day. I mean, it's just a phenomenal rate.
Yeah, it really is. And but I understand that fear. The word I use for that is normal. It's normal to be afraid. It's normal to think, well, if we do this, we'll never talk to our loved one again. And sometimes I have to be very honest with people and say, if you don't do this, you may never talk to them again for a very different reason.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And it's like, I always think if if someone was diagnosed with cancer or some other chronic health condition and they were refusing treatment, you'd
Yeah.
be like, what?
What would
No.
you do? You would
Now.
intervene is what you would do.
Exactly, exactly. It makes sense. Now, Jerry, I didn't think about originally asking you this, but it came to my mind. And I know that, here at EDH, we offer all kinds of resources, but, we do offer also faith-based resources for people who have a faith and want to incorporate that into their recovery journey. And so my question is, and this has come up a lot, there's been a lot of conversation in the church about ways that it has not responded well to mental health issues, addiction, the recovery process, victims of abuse, and that kind of thing. And there has really been, in my view, I think a really, really good awakening in saying we need to deal with this stuff better. Celebrate Recovery, as you mentioned, has been a really great program for many, many people to incorporate faith into their addiction recovery process. But for those families who might be dealing even more with this fear because they're afraid that they won't look like they have the perfect family to their church or their faith community, that it means something about that they're super sinful, or that there's this kind of brokenness that they can't cure, or they'll be ostracized from their faith community. Because that is a very, very real legitimate fear. And what kind of encouragement would you have for those families?
Well, the short answer is call me. Not for an intervention, but I'll be happy to talk you through that. I understand those concerns. As you know, I'm an ordained minister. As you know, I became a raging alcoholic as an ordained minister. These diseases don't discriminate. They're equal opportunity killers. And whether you've got a faith foundation or not, it really is almost an aside. Where it gets tricky is when someone says, just pray, just trust God. Well, I was praying and I was trusting God as my disease progressed and got worse and worse, because there's more to it than just that spiritual piece. It's a big part of it, but there's the biopsychosocial components as well as the spiritual components. So it's important to have a dialogue with someone who understands both sides, understands the spiritual side of things, but also understands the clinical aspects of these diseases. This is not about your loved one being a sinner. This is about your loved one being ill. And it may be resulting in some behavior that you would tag as sinful. There's no question about that. But it really is about a disease, a disorder, whatever word you want to tag it with that you're comfortable with. So I would say it's important to talk to someone who can understand both sides of that equation.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been so educational and so great. Thank you for walking us through the steps and letting me ask some very specific questions, because I think there is sometimes a lot of mystery about these things. And so getting you to clarify a lot of these points, I think was really, really helpful. One last thing I would love for you to share, and that's that, you work every single day at a place where people's lives are transformed. And I think one thing that is always really hopeful and important to emphasize is that people do get better and people do go on to live healthy, full, active lives. Can you just share a little bit of what it's like to be at a place every day where people do get better and that's a reality?
Absolutely. It's an incredible honor to be able to work in this arena. People don't come here for a vacation. They come into our programs because they're battling life and death issues. And they often come in kicking and screaming and wanting to tell us how everything ought to be. But as we watch them progress through the program, as they embrace the tools that we're providing them, as they begin to do the work of recovery, it is just an incredible gift to be able to see that light come on. And then at their graduation ceremony, hear them talk about the transformation, the life-changing things that have happened to them, and what they're going to do on the going forward. There's incredible hope in recovery. There are millions and millions of us around the world living successful lives in recovery. I'm having the time of my life. Recovery for me is not a jail sentence. It's just the opposite. I'm having a great time. And I could never have done it had I not gotten the help that I needed, learned the tools that I've learned, and actively work an ongoing recovery program.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen, brother. Preach. I love it. Wonderful. Well, we put the website up there on the screen so everyone can see themeadows.com. That's where Jerry's at, and really have some wonderful treatment programs there. And they've been an incredible supportive partner of everything that we do here at Eating Disorder Hope. So we're very, very, very grateful. And you're full of just a real commitment to excellence. And for that, we're very, very thankful.
And we're grateful for you, Kirsten, and for all of the folks at Eating Disorder Hope and Addiction Hope. We are truly honored to support the programs.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jerry. I'm going to pop over here and say a little goodbye to our guests, but thank you so, so much. And we'd love to get you back on again soon. We're going to try to do some more ones focused on addiction and co-occurring disorders. So hopefully we can get you back as a guest as well.
Sounds good. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks so much, Jerry. And thank you guys. Sarah Rutherford says, thank you again so much. So, all right, Elsa she snoozed, but just wanted to say thank you guys again so much for joining us. It was really, really great to be with you. We are going to be posting this video to our YouTube channel. It will also live on the top of our Eating Disorder Hope Facebook page for the rest of the week until next week's episode. So if you want to share it with someone, a family member who might be considering an intervention, and you want to share this info with them, please go ahead and share that. This resource is for you. Also, if you're watching this post-broadcast and you want to ask a question, feel free to ask it. I come back and check the comments. We can get a question to Jerry. Let us know. We can, put you in touch if an intervention is something that you're considering. We can put you in touch with the right people. So you just let us know. We're here for you. So wherever you are in the world, thank you so much. We wish you a beautiful, blessed, happy day, rest of your week, and we will see you back here next Wednesday for another episode of Weekly Hope. Stay tuned for our next guest and time, but we really, really look forward to having you. So Elsa and I say good night from Germany, and we'll see you next week. All right. Ciao, everyone.